Hi, everyone, and welcome to this special CHRO conversation hosted by Zinnov. I'm Amita Goyal, Managing Partner at Zinnov, and today I'm thrilled to sit down with Keira Torkko, Chief People Officer and Chief of Staff at Assent, the supply chain sustainability leader helping manufacturers stay ahead of ESG and compliance risk. Assent, backed by two leading private equity firms, has posted outlier growth year after year. At the center of that Assent is Keira. She wears a dual hat, simultaneously architecting global people strategy and steering enterprise execution. Her passion? Nurturing high performing teams, coaching next generation leaders, and solving business puzzles through the lens of people and purpose, all while building the global connectivity in a fast scaling company needs. Thank you, Keira, for joining us. Keira brings more than 25 years of leadership across private, public, and not for profit sectors, blending deep people expertise with board level business agility. I'm so thrilled to have you in this conversation, Keira. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's great to be here today, Amita. I've really enjoyed working with you and your team, and I look forward to this conversation.
Same here. So, building on that experience of Keira, today we'll explore how she's scaling people, culture, and purpose across borders, especially with global expansion. Most recently in India, in Pune, how she shifts the geopolitical dynamics and sustainability at Assent's core. We want to unpack the moves that mattered, the surprises, and how she measured what worked. And then we'll zoom into how AI is impacting how Assent does its business and how Keira thinks of AI in terms of HR. Again, welcome, Keira. So let's start and dive into our first theme, which is how do you navigate culture, geopolitics, and sustainability in global expansion? Okay. First of all, congratulations on expanding into India in Pune successfully. And as you ramp up teams, I'm curious to know. So, as you ramp up teams in new locations, what are the key people decisions that you lock down in the first 90 days? And you still ensure successful integration with global teams. And why do you pick those as the first ones? So, over to you, Keira.
Oh, thanks, Amita. And you're right, there are certainly a large number of decisions that you have to make. So when I was thinking about this, there were a lot of details, and, I've always said that, it's the small details that create meaningful moments about people. So I don't want to discount, all the decisions about benefits and pay structure and all of those things, because those matter. But if I take a step back and think what helps us really make foundational decisions in a new location, and as you know, we've done this a few times and we've learned each time about what's most important. And it's easy to say, think with the end in mind about where you want to be. But when you're moving at scale, that goalpost seems to change a lot. So if I think about what are the three things that were really important in those first 90 days, I think the org design was really crucial, particularly around what was the role and the accountability of the managing director. How much were we going to drive, from a headquarters perspective, and how much were we going to drive from an MD perspective? So making some decisions about the type and the experience that we needed to have there. Secondly, the org design, descending into the teams around what was that going to look like? How were we going to integrate teams globally? Were teams going to be fully functional within that particular geography? Historically, our company has been very blended globally, where we'll have team members from Europe leading team members in North America who have team members elsewhere. So how were we going to make those decisions? I think was really important. And then I think, thirdly, this may be a message that permeates a lot of our discussion, was how much of our global strategy were we firm on and needed to make sure that was reflected in our, in our new GCC in India. So where could we be flexible? From a sustainability perspective, like that for us was an area where we're very strong organizationally. It's built into our culture. And so we needed to make sure that that was reflected organizationally. So that for us was a firm commitment that we drive purpose and sustainability with our team members, and that needed to stay firm. So some bigger things, but at the same time, those needed to guide how we thought about hybrid working, how we thought about blending with global teams, how we thought about benefits, how we thought about work-life, integration. So those bigger pieces helped us inform those many, many decisions you make in the first 90 days.
Oh, that's wonderful. So I couldn't agree with you more that organization design and how it kind of translates into the team structure is so, so important. And since sustainability is your core, when you actually let it embed in your global teams, they also kind of understand what's your core business in some ways. So that's really wonderful. So moving on to the next question that we have, Keira. So even with careful planning, and I've worked with you, I know you're a fantastic planner, you're a fantastic leader. So in spite of all the careful planning we do, surprises pop up when you're expanding in global locations. And whether it's cultural surprises, it could be regulatory, it could be geopolitical. So what are the toughest people surprises that you have ran into? And it could also be related to compliance or leadership styles, or other. It could be as simple as visa related. How do you kind of respond to those, and what impact did it have?
Yeah, I would say, first I'll maybe answer the end question first about how we responded. And I'm just going to comment because we were able to bring in a managing director into our organization that has a lot of experience in working in global organizations, both at the startup scale and at the scaling scale. And in fact, he'd actually worked and led a GCC for a company that was founded just down the road from us in Ottawa. And so we have team members in the company, which we didn't know until after we hired him, that had actually worked as part of his teams, 15, 20 years ago. And so he had a really good understanding of how to make sure the culture, you're getting the best from both cultures. But I would say, some of the things that were surprising to me, in kind of the first couple of months was one, I'd forgotten a little bit about, we don't have a brand in the marketplace. We're brand new in that space, and Assent doesn't mean anything, and I've been fortunate to be with the company 7.5 years. And when I first started, the brand didn't mean a lot here in this market either. And so I think I was a bit caught surprise, or I was like, wait a minute, you don't know what our company does, when we'd be talking to candidates. Secondly, the India market is really hot, which is fantastic because there's such amazing talent, but it means that people have a lot of choice. And I know great talent has choice, but I didn't expect that people wouldn't show up on day one. And so I hadn't necessarily, and by I mean, the full team, we really hadn't thought about backup plans because we've had close to 100% show up on day one. But, people may find better opportunities, which is great. But, that for us was a little bit surprising. I think, and what was also surprising to me in a really wonderful way was just how important community and family played in decision making within India. And so when I would talk to people, it was, decisions were made with a broader set of relationships and individuals. And so that is actually something that I've thought a lot about now personally, and how do I make sure that my decision making takes into account a broader set of people and conditions. So I would say those were some surprises to me over the last couple of months as we've been scaling our enterprise in Pune.
Oh, that's I can completely relate to it. I think it's a hot talent market, and the whole concept of what they call as a no-show it is a surprise to people from several countries. But I think the talent demand and supply enables such behavior sometimes, which we have to know how to navigate through it, and we need to have a mitigation plan if that happens. What do we do? So I completely relate to that, Kira, and thanks for sharing with us.
So there's one other thing that just came to
Yes,
mind, if you
please.
don't mind me popping in here, is
Please.
that people are extremely, at least the team members that I've met are extremely motivated, to grow in their careers. And so we do need to think, it was a surprise to me on how we thought about growth and salary bands differently in that market. Again, none of these are problems. They're just things that we had made assumptions that we could translate what we were doing globally into this market. And so I was surprised in some areas where we needed to do some adaptation where we may not have done such adaptations before.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. And you'll be surprised to know that, I work with several Fortune 20, Fortune 500 companies too. But when you're entering a new country, you have to establish a brand. The good thing for all of us is the Indian talent market has switched to valuing, purpose in work, challenge in work, apart from salaries, which of course always do matter. With the kind of work Ascent does, and it's so purpose driven and it's so high impact, I think it's easier for employees to relate to it. So brand does take time to establish, but we're pretty sure that Ascent is going to really champion it.
Yeah, I think so too.
Wonderful. So since we were talking about sustainability a few seconds ago, and we know that is central to your business, your culture, and you have scaled Kera teams across North America, Africa, and I know you have a team in Kenya, Europe, APAC, and most recently in India. How do you keep that SN DNA consistent while adapting to local realities? Whether it's hiring, development, daily behavior, and what metrics tells you it's working?
Yeah, no, great question. And as I was reflecting on this one, I was thinking about how you evolve as a leader, and I think there are some similarities there. When you first become a leader, you want everyone in the team to be doing the same things the way you've done them, because that's what your experience is. And as you grow the size of team that you have, and as you grow, your team's responsibilities, you start to think more about outcomes, and you realize that people are going to achieve the outcomes differently. And if you tried to have everyone do things the same way that you do, you're never going to grow as a leader because you're going to be so in the weeds on things, And one of the things I like to say about Assent is if we did things the same way as everyone else, we wouldn't grow. We would be growing at the same pace as everyone else. And, when you have private equity investors and team members that continue to expect you to grow at outlier rates, you have to be willing to be diverse and accept different perspectives. And I think it's the same thing with growing global locations. And so for me, I try to think about it more from an outcomes perspective. So what is it that we're trying to achieve? And that local leaders and local team members may want to achieve that differently. And you've got to be okay with the how being different. But you asked the question about metrics and measurement. And, at Assent, we need to be purposeful about where we make investments around sustainability. And so we've committed to two major initiatives. One, we're a certified B Corporation, which holds us to high standards. And it holds, every one of our team members, our investors have aligned with this, as well as we're part of the UN Global Compact around sustainability. And so we report metrics publicly, and we report metrics to our investors yearly around a lot of these topics. So we're being held accountable to those outcomes. So, for example, we report on our environmental footprint and our how are we offsetting our carbon usage. We report on our governance frameworks, whether it be around AI, which I know we're going to talk about as well, how we actually manage our sustainability efforts. We report on our diversity. I'm really proud that Assent has almost equal representation of males and females across the entire workforce, including at our people leadership levels. And so we hold ourselves highly accountable to these metrics, which means we hold all of our leaders globally. So, achieving pay equity in, markets might look differently at the detailed level. Retaining, high performance team members might look different, but we are all being held accountable, to those same metrics, and we report on them and we publish them. And so I think that's important to us. When people join Assent, you talked a little bit about purpose. People who are driven by that kind of purpose are excited about this kind of information and this transparency. Our product delivers transparency across the supply chain, and I really believe that we as an organization need to live that same value around transparency.
I love it. I think I absolutely love what you say about that. You care about outcomes even if it's done differently. In fact, it should not be done the same way as we are used to. And the fact that you have such detailed set of metrics globally being measured, irrespective of how we achieve to that outcome or the result of that metric. That's really, really amazing. And I think something for the audience to really learn from. Thanks for sharing that with us, Keira. So I know you wear the CHRO hat. You're the chief people officer, chief human resource officer, and you wear the chief of staff hat. So you are actually driving a lot of strategic initiatives for the company across global locations. Where do you think that double vantage gives you unfair advantage? So you have kind of a dual role. How does it, if at all, it gives you an unfair advantage? A decision or outcome you couldn't have landed, or a decision or outcome you couldn't have just landed with just one title?
No, that's a great question, because sometimes they're both pretty big important jobs in the organization, and I have to sometimes sit back and remind myself that this is a lot of work, but I really do think that wearing both the hats makes me better at the other one. So being a chief people officer makes me better at being chief of staff, and vice versa, because I have a seat at a lot of different tables, which means I can see how different parts of the organization fit together, but always bringing the people perspective. As is the case with any B2B SaaS company, our greatest asset is our people, and how they're feeling engaged and motivated, and how they're operating through change. And so you can't be making business decisions without thinking deeply about how people are going to be impacted and how you're going to best leverage their talents. And so, Amina, you and I worked together on rolling out the Assent GCC, with yourself and a number of your team members. And while certainly there is a incredibly people strong element, of that strategy, it also, of course, has to fit in to Assent's business objectives. And it has to fit into the objectives that we're trying to achieve in partnership with our investors. And so, my chief of staff hat gives me, I don't want to say unfair advantage, but it gives me access to a lot of information and perspectives to help drive those decisions. So I very well understand what our business is trying to achieve, how our product is trying to evolve. I understand how we're utilizing different tools to be able to achieve outcomes. I understand what our targets are at a very deep level, 6 months and 12 months from now, because I help hold the leadership team accountable to its execution. And I can make sure our people are front and center in all of those strategies. So while sometimes I think, wow, these are two really big hats to wear in a company that's growing and has the expectations that we have, I also think it makes me better at both. But it also means I just make sure I have really incredible teammates around me who can think about those details that are so important to keeping our culture and our people engaged.
That's amazing. So kudos to you. I have never been able to understand how you manage both the hats, but it's really incredible. And I think it's so essential, especially in a world where talent supply and demand is becoming tighter. People strategy and business strategy always need to really, really come together. And you are able to successfully demonstrate this. How you do it is a Keira recipe, I think, but you do it beautifully every day.
But I will say, sometimes like I started at Assent when we were, I think, about 250 or 300 people, and much different ARR than we at today. And I will often say, I used to know when somebody was sneezing in the company. Like I would know when I knew all the minor details, and so I could have much different conversations. And I will say, making the bigger decisions is important, but I still make sure that, I understand at a details level, not to the same scale I used to be able to. But I think that's what makes, teams successful, is that you understand both ends of that spectrum.
Absolutely, that's so you don't know where someone is sneezing in the company, but you still know.
I still know somebody's sick and I need to help them.
Wonderful. Sounds wonderful, Keira. And we're going to switch gears now. We want to understand, as you scale people and you scale the purpose, which Ascent drives across borders, we also want to understand how are you leveraging AI to move faster and smarter, both internally, and how does it align to Ascent sustainability and ethics standards, right? So we're going to switch gears on AI for responsible and rapid scale now.
Yeah.
Okay. All of us know there is a lot of noise around AI. And across Ascent's business functions, where has it delivered measurable impact and where has it failed to deliver, in your observation?
That's a great question, Amita. Certainly, as you're right, our investors are talking about it. Everyone is just so deep in AI. And I think we first started this at a level where we encourage people to be curious. And we had some training and we had some communications around it, and we made tools available, certainly making sure that they were, met security requirements, that we were having ethical use. But, my observation is that when you leave it at that level, people think about things that are going to impact their own daily efforts. So how can I make this easier for me? How can I use ChatGPT to better write this email? How can I do this? But you really need to start creating champions whose purpose is to think about organizational scale or industrial scale use of AI. Because if you leave it to individuals, I think you'll get, and I think we may have made that assumption very early on that some of those individual, initiatives would drive larger. But, you need to have others who are thinking about it across your product. So we certainly think about it and think about it across our product. Our product collects and manages a lot of data. But at the same time, it's important that our data is accurate to enforce, to help companies drive compliance. So you've got to be always thinking about, where do we need to be highly accurate and how do we manage that? And so I think both within our product and then across our teams, we've certainly seen, automation of manual efforts, even in the HR team, we've been able to create ourselves without having developers, our own GPT that, people can ask and answer a lot of questions about the organization. So I think we've seen a lot of replacement of manual work, which enables people to do more value-added efforts. But at the same time, you have to train them to what do they do with this information now that they've received it in different ways. So I would say some of the errors is making assumptions around how things will scale without there being a larger organizational strategy behind it.
Absolutely. I think it's really an amazing point, Keira. So you're saying companies, especially in your case, it has worked that you looked at organizational champions rather than individual drivers of AI. That scale it matters and how it scale matters. So you want to identify those champions and then also kind of train on people on how to use AI or the information that you get responsibly and in a thoughtful way.
And, just like we do for sustainability, we have organizational metrics around AI as well, because we all know what gets measured, matters. And so we are an organization that sets ambitious targets that people are measured against. So making sure we've got that right balance there. You don't just want AI for AI's sake in order to meet a metric. So you've got to be balanced in how you think about that.
Absolutely. Can you walk us through some of the high stakes people decision, whether it was workforce planning, retention, or skill build, where an AI insight changed your mind?
It's interesting when I was thinking about this question, I originally couldn't think of one because in my mind, I think I, had this inherent bias that like, oh no, I understand the people, in our organization, and surely AI isn't going to know our team members, better than I do. But we recently implemented a new human resources information system at Assent. So we switched from one that we dearly loved, but brought up into a larger system, which meant we were doing a lot of work with our data. And well, I don't want to go into the specific decisions. I would say that whole practice of cleaning up our data, being able to run some advanced analytics on us, like made us realize like where we were seeing, turnover that our original tool wasn't able to give us the same detail about, because our new tool, has some AI embedded in it. And of course, we're always very careful about making people decisions based on AI. We want to go back and validate. We have a tool internally that we use called Office Vibe, which tracks and does surveying to assess team members' sentiment. But we were then able to correlate some of this data that we got from cleaning our HRIS, with some of this data that came from our Office Vibe, and it gave me some different insights. It perhaps didn't change decisions, but it changed how I thought about rolling them out, and it changed about where it changed my thinking about where I was seeing some opportunities and some performance in the organization. But I still wasn't at the stage where I could fully trust it, and needed to go back and make sure that it was accurate. But it pointed me in the right direction where I needed to spend a bit more time.
That's amazing, I think, and I think that's that's the kind of the muscle that we get with AI, because sometimes as individuals or humans, if we cannot crunch a lot of data to get insights out of it, it just becomes easier to do that with the tools like the one you mentioned, and it gives us insights, or we still have to validate them, especially when it comes to people decisions. I completely agree with you, but it allows us, speeds it up, and allows us to see things which otherwise would have been difficult to analyze with such
Yes.
vast amount of data.
Yep, 100%.
It's amazing. So, how are you making your HR team truly AI smart? And we have been actually tracking AI use cases across functions in industry at Zinnov, and we do believe, especially in the field of HR, in the function HR function, there's a lot of application. So, how do you pick the right use cases, training on the tools for your team? And you already mentioned one new tool you have adopted, or the challenges, outputs for bias and accuracy. I think it kind of falls into the previous question, but I'd like to hear from you. How are you encouraging that across HR in your company?
Well, I'm actually going to change it around and say it's my team that's encouraging me to be more AI savvy. So I'm really fortunate in that I have a team that's always thinking about use cases and are bringing them to me, which I think is fantastic. So I mentioned, we had a GPT that we call Hello Assenti, which any team member can use to be able to get access to information about HR topics, but now we've expanded it, much more broadly. So what's interesting though, because one of the things I get concerned about is my team isn't actually called HR, it's called employee experience. And so I'm often thinking about what is the experience you're using with AI? And, I don't want to talk about my team as being, cross sellers, but if you aren't involved in conversations directly with people and you leave AI to manage them, you don't have the opportunity to say, Amita, you've asked this question, but I actually think we should be talking about this. AI misses some of those nuances. So where I see the great value is it's answering the manual things that take away from those conversations, but you still want to have those conversations. So I need to make sure that whatever we implement in AI, whether it be the right chatbots, whether it be the right screening, whether it be the right data analytics, whether it be the right identification of where we've got puzzles that we need to think about solving, it ends or in the middle, there is still a conversation because our team members may not know the questions they should be asking, or they might not know, like, what does this mean for me? next? There's always the risk, and I've seen this, for many, many years in HR, is that you can find the answer that you want on the internet about how much you make, how much you should be, where your next role is, how long you should be in a role. And, those things are so contextual. Like, I can look at my job and see I should be making 50,000 or I should be making 500,000, right? And, and it's the same thing with AI. So you need to make sure you've bundled things correctly and changed your workflows so that the interventions at that AI doesn't take you so far to get you off path. So you use AI to access some information, and then you talk to somebody about what does this mean, and then you can use it again. If I think about my own work team, we are fortunate in that we've developed a brand in lots of places around the world. So when we post an opportunity, we get a large number of applicants. How do you really make sure you're digging through and avoiding some of that implicit bias? AI gives you the opportunity to either create more bias or remove it. So being thoughtful about that is important. We talked earlier in this conversation about how do we adapt our tools to represent global markets. And I certainly think AI gives us the opportunity to not just think about the language perspective of it, but how will this be interpreted by somebody in Kenya versus somebody in Malaysia versus somebody in India, and gives us the chance to build that in early rather than as an afterthought.
Wow, that sounds very interesting. And I can only wonder how you have a tool now being interpreted differently in different locations. But as HR, as people, leaders, it's important for you that it's interpreted correctly from Assent's point of view. And I also find it very interesting what you say that, Hello Assenti sounds wonderful, by the way, but any chat GPT kind of tool is as good as the prompts or the questions you're asking them. So sometimes you don't know what you don't know, and you don't know the relevant questions. So what you're saying is, the questions but then you may want to have a conversation where you have a good listener, an empathetic listener, and understands the context very well, and maybe guide you to ask the right questions to kind of take your career trajectory forward. So that's really, really beautiful, Keira. I have one more question for you. AI can help, and this is from a business point of view, right? AI can help you track and drive sustainability. It can think of supply chain data, skill mapping, carbon reporting, but it also has its own energy and ethics footprint. Like you just mentioned, it can, broaden your bias gap, or it can bridge it. It depends on how you leverage it. How are you using AI to advance your sustainability goals without undermining them?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, because I know we actually just spoke the other day about spam. And I will get back to the question in a minute here, but one of the things that we learned was, how much carbon footprint, each spam email takes. And so I was like, wow, I had no clue. I guess it's just obviously the storage and the processing power. And so if you think about the ability of AI to make decisions for you, you need to really think about at what cost, is that happening? Because there's a ton of processing power. And I understand now that AI can tell you that, what is the carbon footprint difference between Amita making a decision, and maybe it's not a perfect decision, versus AI operating that? Or, from a marketing and, campaigning perspective, you really need to be focused, because the cost from a sustainability perspective is, if you start to include that into your decision making thinking, is it going to change it? Maybe, but at least make sure that you're aware. And AI can actually tell you how much it's using, while it's thinking through that. So I think the ability to report, the ability to collect data, certainly the concept of smart buildings. We're just finishing off on a new location in India, and thinking about what do we need to be implementing from a smart building perspective to be able to optimize our sustainability perspectives there. That's important to us. I don't necessarily want my stove to tell me how to cook a chicken, but I do want the building to tell me how to optimize power usage, water usage, energy usage. I think that's really important. We talked a few minutes ago also about using HR data. For us, sustainability, also, impacts how we're making people decisions around, making sure we've got different perspectives at the table. And I think that just some of our reporting that I mentioned earlier just hold us accountable, and AI is helping us significantly with some of that delivery. And so I do think there are some really interesting ways, but the ethics conversations, they're going to always be part of that, equation. For us, it's interesting. One of the things you're hearing from the investment community, is rule of 40 is quickly becoming rule of 50, which is quickly becoming rule of 60, which drives people to perhaps make greater automation and AI decisions because of the potential for savings there. But always making sure you're thinking about it from what cost and, what's the impact around them.
That's really wonderful. In fact, I think that really is important for our audience, because what you're highlighting is that we may be relentlessly using emails or prompts, and how much carbon footprint and sustainability impact of this massive kind of revolution that's happening around us it is important to look at that as well, and especially with the way Assent functions in the sustainability area, it is very important to keep a watch out for that and strike a balance on how we're making our decisions and what are we leveraging on, what is a mix of human intelligence and the AI intelligence to make decisions.
Yeah, and not to undermine the incredible value, that we're finding from it, but just making sure you're taking that 2-minute step back to think about at what cost, is this, and does that make sense from a return on investment perspective?
No, that's absolutely amazing. And I think I learned a lot from some of these responses, Keira, because usually we do not think about these things. We do not actually step back for 2 minutes and ask that question at what cost. So thanks for pushing us to think like that. I think that that was a masterclass, Keira, and thanks for the amazing masterclass you gave us on scaling people and with a purpose, from locking down the first 90-day decisions and creating a brand new GCC Global Capability Center in India, in Pune. How you've been using AI insights to sharpen workforce planning, and your experience shows how HR can move the speed of business and stay true to sustainability at the same time. So really, really thank you. I love what you said about making the right organizational decision, how it permeates into your team structure, how you create a very great balance, even if you are, adding AI to the way you work, even if you're becoming AI savvy. How do you allow and navigate, people-centered questions to be combination of the AI tools that you're using, but at the same time, the expertise that the people partners bring to the table so that they can ask the right questions. How you're scaling globally, amazingly, you're allowing people to be diverse and different, which is so important in a private equity world, like you mentioned, which is moving at a very fast pace. And the rule of 40 is changing to rule of nth, really. How you're allowing people to be different, but still be outcome driven and be accountable around the same metrics globally. Wonderful, Keira. Thank you so much for talking with us and taking out time for, this amazing masterclass. Thanks a lot.
Great. Thanks, Amita. I enjoyed it.